6 Irishmen jailed 12 years ago for the Birmingham pub bombings must wait until the new year to hear the result of their appeal. The Lord Chief Justice, Lord Lane, closing the men's appeal at the Old Bailey, said it had been a difficult matter and there was a great deal of evidence to consider.
The Moors murderer Ian Brady has claimed that he led police to the grave of one of his child victims during yesterday's search on Saddleworth Moor. These pictures of Brady were taken by the Manchester Evening News in the area where he says he buried 12-year-old Keith Bennett more than 20 years ago. He said that he was willing to return to pinpoint the spot, but the police team who accompanied him said that the search had produced nothing positive and there were no plans to start digging again.
1,200 arthritis sufferers who claim they were injured by the painkiller Opren have finally been offered compensation. They've been campaigning against its American manufacturer, Eli Lilly, ever since the drug was withdrawn 5 years ago. Today's award is believed to total about £2.5 million. But the High Court imposed certain conditions. Claimants must keep their awards secret, they must acknowledge that the manufacturer does not accept liability, and they must promise not to campaign against Eli Lilly in future.
For alleged Opren victims, their relatives and supporters, the road to the High Court has been a long one. The settlement now on offer comes 5 years after the product was withdrawn from the UK market. At its launch 2 years previously, it had been hailed as a wonder drug. Nearly 100 people are said to have died, 4,000 more reported side effects, skin problems, kidney and liver damage. A global sum, believed to be about £2.5 million, was agreed with Eli Lilly by lawyers representing 1,200 claimants in the biggest action of its kind in English legal history. In his judgment, Mr. Justice Hurst said that details of the global sum would be kept confidential. A special arbitration scheme is to be set up to decide how it should be apportioned. Eli Lilly had made the compensation offer without admitting any liability. He said the settlement proposal could break down unless the vast majority of claimants accepted it.
The lawyers have spent a long time coming up with an agreement. This agreement is acceptable to the company. We certainly think it's better than continuing lengthy and probably costly litigation.
But Kathleen Grasham, whose mother died after taking Opren, said law and justice seem to have different meanings.
I think the situation is despicable, it is insulting, but it is totally legal.
There was concern too about the vastly different levels of compensation paid out in America. One victim there was awarded $6 million.
If it turns out that 1,500 people in Britain are receiving less than one American, and if it turns out that these people are receiving less than the lawyers have got, then there will be public and parliamentary outrage.
He attacked the secrecy surrounding the deal, from which over 300 people are excluded because they applied too late. Now the campaigners intend a new battle, reforming the law relating to compensation claims.
The BBC is now able once again to report references to the security services made in the courts or in Parliament. A High Court judge today changed the terms of an injunction obtained by the government against the BBC over a radio series, My Country, Right or Wrong. The judge will decide next week whether the injunction should be lifted entirely.
The BBC went to the High Court to fight the injunction granted last Thursday, principally to stop a radio series examining the control of the security services. It also banned the naming of any former or serving security officers, even if they'd been publicly identified. The BBC's argument for the complete withdrawal of the government's injunction was heard in chambers by Mr. Justice Owen. On that, he reserved his judgment till next Wednesday. But at the initiative of the government side, the BBC agreed to a relaxation of the terms of the injunction, which will mean that it can now report freely anything said on intelligence matters in Parliament or in the courts of law. It'll also mean the BBC can report freely anything said by the government itself publicly about the security services. The ruling means that whereas last week we could only speak of an unidentified former intelligence officer who'd written the controversial Spycatcher biography, this week we can report the government's High Court battle to suppress Mr. Peter Wright's MI5 memoirs without having to conceal his identity. Again, last week we could only refer to a recent interview in Moscow given by a Mr. Kim Philby. Today we can repeat what the British government acknowledged publicly 24 years ago, that Philby was a Soviet double agent. After today's court hearing, BBC executives said that the corporation was still more restricted than the press and other broadcasters. Apart from Parliament and the courts, it could only report security matters which the government chose to make public.
The Scandinavian airline SAS has just said it's offering £110 million for a stake in British Caledonian. It would give them just under 25% of the shares, and BCAL hope that will prevent a takeover by British Airways. A key part of the deal is that an existing shareholder, Investors in Industry, will have the biggest stake in BCAL, and it's hoped that will quash government fears about foreign control of British Caledonian.
Last month, the takeover by British Airways seemed cut and dried, following the agreement of the Monopolies Commission. But then BA warned that the merged airline would face at least 2,000 job losses. And although it was promised these would be voluntary and redundancy pay generous, BCAL started having second thoughts. SAS was a surprise late entry, and negotiations were more diplomatic than commercial. Last week, the Trade Secretary, Lord Young, said he had no objection on public interest grounds. But the Transport Secretary, Paul Channon, warned that he would block any deal which involved SAS taking effective control of BCAL. Today's bid is a last-ditch attempt to get round Mr. Channon's opposition. BCAL say they prefer a link with SAS because it preserves the airline and jobs.
What we've been doing for about the last 10 years is looking for a partner. It just so happens that we have found a partner, and that partner is SAS, and from our point of view, this should work very well indeed.
A lot now depends on Paul Channon. If the Transport Secretary agrees to this deal, it will mean a major setback for British Airways. BA are likely to respond with a higher offer for British Caledonian shares, but it could be the end of January before the future of BCAL is finally settled.
Bob Geldof has ended his 8-day visit to Ethiopia to assess the latest famine. Before leaving for Mozambique, the rock star, who organised relief efforts during the last emergency, said the situation was now critical, with some areas having only 15 days' food left. But the greatest need was for development aid to fight famine in the long term. Bob Geldof ended his visit in some of the worst affected areas of northern Ethiopia.
Geldof wanted to see for himself how the environment has been devastated by centuries of drought, and to find the famine victims who've stayed behind in the most remote areas of all. It was a dangerous descent, slipping and slithering down the track, where the slightest mistake could have been fatal. Nothing illustrates more clearly the sheer scale of the problem facing the relief agencies than this, the most inaccessible of areas. This passes for the road in these parts, and no vehicles can get through. For Geldof, there was relief transport as the going got tough, but it still took 10 hours to complete the trek to the mountaintop village of Benat. He was shocked by what he discovered. Villagers facing starvation, yet determined not to leave their homes.
They know they're going to die. They know, a lot of them know they're going to die. But it's, at a certain point, they say it's God's will. And some people we were talking to a couple of days ago, when I asked who was to blame for the drought, they said God.
200 miles away, Geldof found some of the villagers from Benat who didn't want to die. They'd just arrived at Village 2 in Metema, a resettlement camp near the border with Sudan. Exhausted, malnourished, and in some cases dying, they waited for processing. Survival means becoming volunteers in the controversial resettlement program of Ethiopia's Marxist government, to shift 1.5 million people out of famine areas. Most are suffering from famine-related illnesses. A father too ill to share the food he's brought his children so far to find. A mother too sick to care for her premature newborn baby. Coming from different areas of Ethiopia makes them prone to diseases like malaria. But for these tragic victims of famine, resettlement is their only hope of staying alive. This is Christopher Morris for the 9 o'clock news in Metema, Ethiopia.
Chris Morris reporting. There was a new role for Prince Harry today, playing a goblin. He starred in the Christmas play at his nursery school in West London, and there to cheer him on were the Prince and Princess of Wales. Prince Harry, who usually has to put on a show in public, was only too pleased to do so today. He was making his acting debut and wanted to make the most of it. The Prince played a goblin, getting rave reviews from the audience, and especially from a proud Prince and Princess of Wales.